Live with CDP, a weekly sports and entertainment podcast live on YouTube, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on audio via Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and Anchor FM. Now here's your host, Chris Palme.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 13 of Live with CDP Sports Talk, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet, dealership, 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210 and tell them that Chris Palme, aka CDP, sent you there as well. And also, guys, you can now do pre-orders for the Cadillac Silverado, for the Cadillac Lyric, and also the Silverado as well, if you guys are interested in that as well. And I want to say thank you again to Barry Cullen Chevrolet for sponsoring Live with CDP Sports Talk as well. I'm looking forward to my show today, guys. This is my first show of 2023. My guest is going to be Evan Budrovich. I hope I pronounced it right. He's a play-by-play announcer for ESPN, and he's also the social media coordinator and content specialist for Campbell University. So I really look forward to speaking to Evan today about his broadcasting career and stuff like that as well. Good afternoon, Evan. How are you?
What's going on, Chris? Hey,
good.
New year, ready to rock and roll.
I hope I got your last name right. Okay.
Oh, spot on. Yeah.
Okay, because that's one thing I try to pride myself on, is trying to get my guest's last name right. And if not, I either cheat and use YouTube or I send him a message as well.
Yeah, it's like a Serbian-Croatian mix. So there's not a lot of us out there, but there's a few of us here and there.
So I'm still a work in progress there. Work in progress, and that's one thing why I love doing my live podcasts as well. So how are you doing?
Awesome. It's we're in the middle of basketball season out here. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, basically. And with all the triangle schools, Duke and North Carolina and NC State, I've worked a ton of games for them this year. So that's been a blast. And then, this time of year, it's all conference play. So it really heats up, and just going to those games. And, my girlfriend and I, we're big Canes fans. We go to a lot of hockey games in Raleigh, and it's just neat this time of the year. I know I'm a big baseball guy personally, but I love basketball hockey season. It's always fun.
Ironically, a couple years ago, how I got a taste of the broadcasting bug was volunteering with a semi-pro basketball team here, and it just led me to doing camera work, and it led me to doing my podcast. So just being in the right place at the right time has now led me into hopefully a new career in radio.
That's the best part. You're never too young to start anything. Trust me.
Absolutely. And for my podcast show, I cover about 7 or 8 sports. So I really try to get into everything. I'm now into box lacrosse, which is indoor lacrosse, and I cover basketball as well. I'm actually a basketball media affiliate for the National Basketball League of Canada here, which is a pro basketball league here for Canadians. They do have Americans play in the league as well, but it's really good basketball in that as well. So the game of basketball has actually given me a number of opportunities in the media field.
No, that's awesome. I'm still at Campbell now, but a few years back, there was a real short player named Chris Clements. He was like 5'8", and he scored 3,000 points in his college career, which there's only a handful of guys to do that. He's now playing in China in their top league. So you're not kidding. You can go play from the States and go anywhere to play basketball.
And basketball has really taken off here in Canada, especially in the Toronto area as well.
Oh, that's awesome, Chris. What's going on today?
Not too much. I went before we get into some questions, Evan. I just wanted to get your thoughts. Did you see some of the Bills-Bengals game on Monday night? And what were your thoughts of what happened there, unfortunately, to Hamlin?
Yeah, I didn't see the play live, right? But then all of a sudden you're scrolling your phone. So we turn on ESPN, and we like to go to bed pretty early East Coast time. So I'm knocked out by 9 or 9:30, but we're lying in bed watching it. I couldn't turn it off. I mean, I played high school in football growing up, and elementary school in Pop Warner, as they call it here in the States, but I loved it. So I could relate and understand what was going through. And then you see the ambulance come out and just this awkward moment. And what I really took notice to, one, the family, of course, but then two, just how Joe Buck and Troy and the crew handled that moment, because that was a question I had in my head. It's like, hey, if this ever happened in a broadcast and a player passed out or a player was unconscious, and I've seen it before, not to that extent, but I've definitely seen players go down and you take that time out, but usually in the next 2 or 3 minutes, they're off the court or they're getting back to their feet. Like that was 10 minutes of delays. And then you have an hour where you're trying to update people and here you are in a booth and you don't have all the information. So that's where my brain went right away. And it's scary too, because I mean, you know that Hamlin's heading to the hospital, but that's all you know at that point. So for the next hour, you're getting little updates and you want to sound poised and professional, but you also don't want to lie to people, or, you know, the old assumption, you don't want to pretend to be a doctor. So there you are, just sitting in the moment and kind of hoping and praying he's okay, but that's all you really know. So credit to the crew of how they covered that.
In my previous job, I was in security. I ended up having to do CPR and use a defib on 2 people, and thankfully, I was able to save their lives, but it's so emotional. Even if you don't know these people, just doing CPR and using a defib, it's very emotional, and it takes a while to get over it, but, thank God I had the medical training,
Mm.
and, I was able to get there in time, and I think that's what happened with Hamlin as well. They got to him on time, but you just never know nowadays. And I tell my friends, it's important to. I think it's important for everyone to at least learn the basics of first aid, CPR, and stuff like that.
No, the CPR training is a great point. Even at Campbell, so I used to work with athletics and with the sports teams, but we would have to do some very basic, okay, CPR, first aid training, just because we'd be at these practices, filming or social media or whatever, and just to be aware of it. You know, now on the university side, we need it more since we're around students, and God forbid you're in a classroom or, you know, wherever you're at. But you're right, that's very important.
And what I wanted to say too as well. I went to a Bills game in September 2007. They were playing the Denver Broncos, and one of Buffalo's tight ends, who's on special teams, Calvin Everett, he ended up getting paralyzed on the field. They had to shut the game down for an hour, and everybody in the stands were panicked. They didn't know what was going on, and the NFL continued the game after. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't the same. The fans couldn't get into it, and I think the players struggled to finish that up, knowing that their teammate was he was paralyzed, and it was scary as anything.
Mental health is so important, right? And we talk about it more with COVID the last 2 or 3 years, but you know, even for these athletes, just having that emotional support, someone to talk to, like, hey, one of their friends, one of their teammates, they don't know what his future is, right? And you know, it's a hard question to say, hey, can you play Sunday? And usually it's, can you overcome an injury when you lose Hamlin? But no, it's like, can you overcome possibly whatever happens to him, right? Like I know he's progressing better at the hospital, but just the mental wherewithal and then the awareness of knowing, hey, that could be me, and that's no fun. And I give credit to all those players and especially the staff, right? Like the athletic trainers, the mental health professionals, the coaches, all those people that we don't usually talk about previewing the Bills and the Bengals. You know, we're talking about the quarterbacks, but those people are just as important. I think it really came to light this week.
And as we all love sports, Evan, as you do as well, it just puts everything into perspective.
No doubt.
And I definitely agreed with them postponing this game. It just would have been right to play the game. And these guys are human beings as well. There's a human element to sports as well.
Yeah, I mean, here we were sitting on a couch watching the game and feeling emotionally connected to a player I'd never heard of, right? And then just imagine for those folks who see him every day you know, the good news is that he's progressing and getting better. You know, who knows what the future holds, but at least there's prayers and thoughts. And I love the GoFundMe page and some things like that. But yeah, you never imagine that, and you never want that to happen.
And as you mentioned before, Evan, too, I thought Joe Buck and Troy Aikman and the whole crew did a great job there in a very difficult situation. And it just goes to show you that on TV or on radio, anything that's live, you have to be prepared for the unknown.
So I had an example that not to that effect, but something that made me think of this moment. So I was calling a women's basketball game, Campbell and Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State's out of the Atlanta, Georgia area, and Campbell's based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. So the two teams are gearing up to play, and the point guard for Kennesaw State the night before. So we sort of heard news of it that morning, but she was charged with murder in a case from
Wow.
about 3 months ago. And you sit there and the news comes out that morning that, hey, she's not going to play. She's in jail and waiting for her court sentence and the different things. And you sit there and you go, well, how do we cover this, right? And this isn't a health issue, but this is a very pertinent to the moment. So I sat there with my sideline reporter and my analyst, and it was tough. Like I'll be frank, I wasn't ready for that moment. Now you get ready for it very quickly, and in the open, you say, hey, this player is not going to play. She's charged with such and such. And then the analyst kind of described, okay, when the player's out, what does this mean to the team? And then the sideline person gave a statement from the school, and she explained, okay, hey, we talked to the school and they said X, Y, and Z, but that's all we really knew, right? So you have to at least tell people, hey, the top point guard for Kennesaw State's not playing in this game, and here's why. If I had 10 years of experience, a little more, maybe I had a better understanding. But, in that moment, it was just, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know. And here's why it happened and how it affects the game.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And like I said, every time I have a guest on here, I always learn a new story. And as well, and this is the one thing also, Evan, as well. Like I said, doing TV and doing the radio side, you always have to be prepared for things that are out of your control, and it's how you respond to it. And everybody on ESPN that night did a great job because this I've been around 50 years. I've seen some terrific like real bad injuries, or in the case of Kevin Alvett being paralyzed. I've never seen somebody have a cardiac arrest on the field like that in Cincinnati Monday night.
No, and when I was growing up playing high school football, there was a lot of cases of overheating, especially in Texas,
Yes.
Florida, and California. And I was part of this too, where like we practice and it's 90 degrees outside and you're running at 2 in the afternoon, So I think coaches have gotten smarter about how they schedule practice, but something like this, you just can't anticipate.
I did see something similar to what happened Monday with the Detroit Red Wings and Nashville Predators in 2005. Yeri Fisher, a defenseman for the Red Wings, he basically went into cardiac arrest on the bench, and the Red Wings and the Predators medical staff were able to save his life with a defib.
Hmm.
And he was able to recover and stuff like that. So I'm just saying prayers to the Hamlin family right now, and hopefully for a full recovery in the future.
Absolutely.
Okay, I was just going to ask you some questions, Evan.
Sure.
Sorry, I don't know what it is today. I thought I was prepared, but I'm just kind of off to a little bit slow start here. But mistakes do happen, and that's why I'm trying to keep improving on my show. But can you tell my audience here in Ontario, just outside of Toronto, a little bit about yourself, and when did you decide you wanted to pursue a career into broadcasting, into media?
I wish I had some super corny cliche story, but let's see if this counts. I was 12 years old playing Little League Baseball, and you play the doubleheader. So you have the game in the morning and there's the game in the afternoon. And for the afternoon game, they needed someone to do the public address announcing to say like who's batting and who the coaches are and whatever. And here I was, 12 years old, just playing in the morning game. Like, oh, maybe I'll try this. Like this seems kind of fun. And I grew up watching Vin Scully in Los Angeles, so I had realized that was a thing, and you could have a job as a whether it was an announcer or a reporter or a public address person. But there I was at 12 years old, sitting there and introducing the lineups for both teams and who was batting and what was the score. And again, was that the biggest thing in the world? No, but to me at 12 years old, it was like, oh wow, this is pretty neat, and there's ways to do this than just seeing it on television. So that sort of sparked my interest, and then I went to high school in Los Angeles and then went to USC, Southern California. And as a student, it was great because they had a student radio station. So I got to sit on the roof of the Coliseum. And I kid you not, at the time, it was on the roof with an overhang. And we set up our radio equipment and called games, every home football game. So that was a blast. And it was fortunate, too. They had the radio, so we got to travel with basketball and do some road games, especially in Las Vegas for like the conference tournament. And they had lacrosse, women's outdoor lacrosse. They had softball, baseball, so caught a lot of those sports and kind of just learned to do it on the fly, right? Like USC had a good program, but it's not the Syracuses of the world where there's 800 kids who are all really talented. So there was a handful of us, and we got better, and that's what got me into it. And then, oh gosh, I graduated college in 2015. So here I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I think we all have those questions. And got an email for an internship out here in North Carolina to work with a collegiate league team called the Morehead City Marlins, which of course I'd never heard of before, but you take the call and then boom, I moved out here and literally spent 6-8 months working for this team. And it was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to grind into this and try it and not just have a journalism degree, but like go into it. And that's opened so many doors. And here I am now 8 years later, if you count 23, doing this full time. And it's been real fun.
Really goes fast. When you have a passion for something, time just flies.
I think I noticed that too during COVID, right? When events slowed down, life slowed down. And at the same time, it didn't. It's still 7 days a week. You're just the same enthusiasm and the same oomph to do things throughout the day just wasn't there. And I'm an avid bike rider, riding my bicycle, and I love listening to the podcasts and doing things like playing poker, card games, poker. I love outdoor activities, hiking, climbing. So for me, COVID was nice just to see the world a little bit. But at the same time, it was like, well, I'm working, but I'm not doing a lot of events, and being at those games really made a difference. So it was a time for me to reflect and kind of regain perspective.
I started my podcast show in March of 2020 when we had the shutdown, and it really got me through the pandemic. And because I lost all my freelance media work, my camera work I was learning, but doing this podcast, I just focused on improving, getting guests. It took me about 4 or 5 months of podcasting before I could get somebody on, and it really helped me get through those 2-year pandemic by doing this podcast show.
Well, here you are on season 5. So clearly it's working and it's working well. So that's good to hear.
And it's just like anything in life. The more you do something, the more reps, the more you keep working on something, improving, people start noticing your work. And I've been really lucky to get so many great guests from your country, from Canada on my podcast show. And a podcast is only as good as its guests. I'm just a host, and people want to hear what the guests have to say. And this is something I really enjoy and have a passion for.
No, I remember I've seen your LinkedIn page for months, and I was like, oh, I've liked different stuff you've done, and we've talked back and forth about random things. And then you sent the LinkedIn message. I was like, perfect. Let's jump on and do this. That'd be great.
That's great. Now, hey, you mentioned I've learned about listening skills. You already told us where you went to school. Now, did you have a mentor or mentors when you were in school or when you were finished school?
Oh, so many. It's incredible. I think one person that stands out is Sam Farber, who's the radio voice of the Charlotte Hornets NBA basketball team. Yep. And at the time, he was working in minor league baseball. So I interned for him at a team. They were called the Inland Empire 66ers, which was based off of Route 66. So it was kind of lined up with the route, and it was a neat name for the team. But he was the voice of the Angels affiliate, one of their minor league teams. So I worked with him for a summer, and he went to USC. He literally was in my footsteps maybe 10 years prior. So he was someone that I really just tried to follow around and learn and like, hey, I saw Vin Scully as a kid call these games, but how do you do it at the minor league level? How do you manage, at the time he was engaged? How do you manage the family? How do you put this all together? It's not just show up to a game and call it, right? Like there's a lot more to it. So those 6 to 8 months were great. And then we've kept in contact since, but to have him as a true day-to-day mentor, that was so huge for me.
And being from California, obviously the late Vin Scully, and also the late Chick Hearn,
Mhm.
two of the best ever in the industry. And like I said, there's been so many great broadcasters, and those guys are. When you think of the Dodgers or you think of the Lakers, you think of those two gentlemen.
Although they were great, but then too, even just when you like traveled, right? And you're listening to another announcer and you go, "Oh man, like this person's really good too." And then cable comes around and it's
Yep.
you can start watching all the games and you don't just watch the team in your area. And it's like, "Oh, I like this style and I like what Dave Fleming does for the Giants in San Francisco and I like what X, Y, and Z person does." And not that you're taking notes as a kid, but you're sort of organically learning that information. You go, "Okay, like this is how you introduce a game." Gary Miller calls a baseball game this way. Dave Fleming calls it this way. John Shambi does it this way. And you pick up little elements that you like, and all of a sudden you have a good little memory bank of ideas.
And I was lucky about a year ago to get Dan Shulman on. He's Canadian, by the way. He's from
Yeah.
Toronto, and he's one of the best too. He does a great job doing baseball, basketball, and yeah. Every time I have a guest on, such as yourself, I learn something from them. And everybody has their own style, and that's what they're telling me too. Is don't try to copy somebody else. Have your own style. Be yourself.
Yeah, the second because I'll admit, when I was first calling games, and again, I was in college and young and naive, I tried to sound like Vin Scully. And, here I was telling these long stories in the middle of a baseball game. And I think one time, one of the coaches, I was interviewing the coaches pregame, and he was like, "Hey, my wife and my family, they love what you're doing, but remember, you're Evan. There's a Vin in the name Evan, but try to be yourself." And I was like, "Oh, wow, that's a great point." Like, as much as I want to reflect what he's doing, I just need to take elements of what he does and then incorporate it into how I work an event. And that's been so helpful.
And that's what I've been getting from all my guests on here, and everybody from the profession and stuff. Now, I've noticed you've done radio and TV. What are some of the biggest difference from doing radio play by play from TV play by play?
Night and day. It's honestly crazy. I've spent multiple years, whether it's a radio voice of a team or a TV voice, and it's a shift, right? Like you have to literally have a different mindset when you're working both. Clearly, the sport's the same, the prep is similar, but on television, it's so much more. And I've learned this the last 2 or 3 years about literally painting what you're seeing on screen. As much as you want to go off and have these conversations, like you can do that, but you have to keep it within the realm of what are people seeing on the screen. How do you inform them? How do you entertain them? Radio is fundamental, and there's some skills that are important, but the storytelling in radio is a whole different art than the storytelling on television because they can incorporate the shots, they can get you different angles of things, and there's a producer and a director always saying, "Hey, the announcer just talked about the popcorn at the stadium. One of our down low cams. Let's get popcorn, and we can flash between that and the pitchers because in baseball there's a lot of time." But in a sport like football, there's not as much. And in radio, it's very, hey, 1st and 10 from the left hash of the 32, handoff right, running back bounces outside. In TV, 1st and 10, Johnson goes right, breaks a tackle, gets 6. So it's a little different style. The fundamentals are the same. And I did a lot more radio growing up. Not that I'm that old, but I did a lot more radio at first than TV. So I liked that transition. I felt like it'd be hard going the other way from television into radio because the less is more idea. Like I could always dial back what I'm saying. And I've been fortunate. I work with a talent coach. Her name's Jill Montgomery. She's amazing. She was a sideline reporter for ESPN, really smart. And every week, whenever we have a session, she'll go over the tape and be like, "Hey, do this, do that. Why are you saying this? Why?" And it really makes you think. So 2 different mindsets, but definitely things that can be done.
And about a year ago, I had Eric Smith, the radio voice of the Raptors, on. And when I first started doing this show, Evan, I wrote everything down. It was all scripted. And Eric gave me some advice. He said, "Chris, it's okay to write stuff down or whatever, but talk to me like you're having a conversation at the arena or a coffee shop." Basically, same with Tom McCarthy from the Phillies and the NFL and CBS, told me the same thing, have a natural conversation. And thanks to the guys who have taken their taking time out of their day to come on here. I think I've learned how to ad-lib more as well. It's okay. Like I said, I still write my points down, but I've taken advice the last couple of years and try to use it to improve my podcast show.
Well, you mentioned advice, and the one thing I've always learned from others, and this would be helpful for everyone here, listening, truly opening your ears and understanding what the other person's saying. Now, that's challenging, right? Because in a game, you're sort of doing two things. You're describing the action and you're reacting to your analyst. So it's two different mindsets. But whether it's this podcast or you're working an event, you have to have the ability to say, okay, the person next to me is talking a lot about this point guard. So I need to be aware when something good or bad happens with this point guard to reference. Hey, let's say John's my analyst. Hey, John, you came into the game saying the point guard has to hit a bunch of 3-pointers. Well, today she's 0 of 6. What's happened to such player? And that's me paying attention to what that person may have said 20 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago, but being ready to get that information out, because that's what the viewer's thinking. The viewer's like, oh man, why is this player struggling today? Well, that's my job, is to listen and pay attention and then get my analyst involved, because they're the stars of the show. Don't let me fool you. You know, we're here to keep this thing straight and narrow, but they're there to inform and teach you something. So I want to be the one who's listening and paying attention to help them teach.
And sometimes when you ask a guest a question, they can give you the answers to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other questions as well. And you're right about the listening skills. And I think I have improved the last couple of years, but I'm still trying to get better every day and every week with that as well. But listening skills are huge, as well as being able to know how to ad-lib with your guests, how to talk to your guests.
I'll tell you what, though, the listening part's funny, right? Because we do it for this more formal and structured podcast and broadcast and game. And then I have dinner with my girlfriend, or I go out with my friends, and I say, wow, this really translates to life. It seems silly, right? But truly just listening and being more active in those conversations at a restaurant or wherever really pays off for everything. So it's not just, for this event, it has some tangible skills everywhere.
Absolutely. Now, do you remember your first play-by-play game that you did, and were you a little bit nervous?
Oh man. I want to say the first event I did. Okay, I do remember now. My sophomore year of college, USC baseball. This was like in early February, so cold for Los Angeles standards. It was in the 40s. They were playing Long Beach State, who I grew up watching them because they were 10 minutes from my house. USC Long Beach State. I was the analyst for the game. Another student called the play-by-play, but I think I did like an inning or two of play-by-play, and let's say 6 or 7 innings of analyst work. The nerves, I don't know if I was nervous. I think I was anxious, right? Like excited and just eager to get in there and call the game. It was helpful to be the analyst the first few innings because, I mean, heck, I played baseball. I coached it. I watched it. So for me, that was natural. And it was like, oh, this is why he missed the curveball, or, X, Y, and Z thing. I don't remember what I said all those years ago. But when I had that first event, and it's like 5 minutes before the game, right? I just took a deep breath and said, hey, if you're going to have a bad broadcast, it's not going to be the level of Vin Scully or Joe Buck right away. And I think that helped me a lot, just knowing that I have to take the step to do it and then watch it again and keep doing it and focusing on little things. Because you're right, the nerves, it wasn't like I was shaking in my core, but I definitely had that excitement. It was like, oh man, this is something you've watched people do for years. You at 12 years old stepped on a microphone and did some announcements, and now it's real. Like 10 years later, you get to try it out.
And when I first did my first game as a camera operator without even going to school for it, I was doing Ontario Hockey League games, which is a feeder league for the National Hockey League.
Mhm.
And I was nervous. I had never done camera work before in my life. And they were patient with me, and the producer was so great with me. And then basically the more I came back to do it, I just started gradually getting better and improving. But I still, even to this day, when I do a game before a broadcast, a live broadcast, I still get a little bit of nervous. But the producers tell me, if you don't have any nervousness before a broadcast, then maybe it's time for you to get out, because they say it's a good thing too, a little bit.
I am a big fan of production work. My full time job the last few years has been to oversee the productions of our streams at Campbell. So, and you're training biology students and engineering students and kids who are interested in sports but maybe don't want to be a producer or director, right? So you have to be very straightforward. You have to have photographs to explain things, and going over in football, like the rule of thirds, what yard lines is what camera. It switches all the time. In basketball, what does camera one mean? What does camera two mean? And having that background of teaching it and doing it behind the scenes has been so helpful calling the game. Not that I'm sitting there and saying, oh, hey, we need this shot or we need that shot, but understanding more, okay, if I start this story, I know that this producer has to signal to this graphics operator to then get this camera ready, and that better makes me prepared for the moment. And then two, can better empathize and understand why is something working or why is something not working. I never want to have an ego in an event, but if there is something that I'd like or want to incorporate, I have a better idea of how that happens. So I can better explain to the person that I'm talking to, usually a producer on talkback, of how that will translate.
I have a lot of respect for producers as well, because it's like being the quarterback of a broadcast, and being a camera operator. I kind of look at it as myself as a receiver. I'm got to run the routes like a receiver does, and the quarterback gets me the ball. And what I do for the producers, try to get the best shots possible so the producer has a story to tell to the audience.
Yeah, and off that anecdote, it's not like there's just 9 routes in the tree. There's a million different routes you can run when you're operating a camera for certain sports.
And one thing that also I've learned from doing camera work and doing media work as well, there's a lot of work in a setup and a teardown that the audience and the fans don't see. There's a lot of parts for a broadcast, and you need everybody on the same page to have a successful broadcast.
I do a lot of high school football productions here in the Carolinas, and the setup time, let's say it's a 7 o'clock game, and people may know this, they may not, but for a 7 o'clock high school football game, the crew's getting there at 10 a.m. to set up. It's the cameras, it's running the lines, it's setting up the cables, it's then laying down the tape over the cables so people aren't tripping. It's getting the Ethernet, it's setting up the cable, making sure that you can send the signal out to Bristol for ESPN or the various stations, wherever they're located. All that stuff's so important. So I give those folks, and I've done it myself, running lines for football games at Campbell. So I get it on that end. And then, now calling a lot of these events, but being there to set up the camera in the booth. Or, I was at Duke a couple weeks ago, and one of the monitors was out. So I knew how to get the SDI line and plug it back in and set up the camera and make sure it was working. And, that saved them time from coming over to fix it. But having that experience helped me in the moment. And it's not just, oh, well, I don't know what I'm doing. It's, okay, here's where I can help. If not, we can bring in someone else. But just being that team player, like you mentioned.
And that's the one thing I like about the broadcasting industry. Every time I do a camera work job or whatever, media work, there's always something new to learn. And I continue like learning new stuff on my podcast and doing a broadcast as well. And also, sometimes things don't always go smoothly on a broadcast, but you still have to go on with the show. You can't just say, sorry, guys, things aren't going perfectly. That's the end of the broadcast.
I've learned too to avoid the ums, the ahs, the likes, any of those pauses that sometimes come out in your vocabulary, because it's a trick. And you notice it more when you watch other people, or when I'm talking to a friend and I go, well, why do you say like, and then you start your sentence? And it makes you think, how can I better communicate? And even that little simple adjustment of pausing for a second, emphasizing a word, and then going into that sentence, that makes what you're saying or what I'm saying more impactful. And then people go, oh, yeah, he sounds knowledgeable. He sounds informed. And that all helps in how you're perceived by the audience.
I'm still working on that right now as well. It's something that takes time, but that's something that I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I'm still trying to improve upon. And also, instead of using those catchphrases, just to pause for a second.
Yeah, there's no one's ever complained that you've talked too quickly. They'd rather you say it correctly and sound smart than try to rush out and it sounds like jargon.
Absolutely. Now, can you just tell us about your current role with Campbell University as your social media coordinator and content specialist, and how did you come about that role?
I'll use a sports analogy for you. So when I was in the athletic department at Campbell University, at Go Camels was some of the accounts and things we ran. I was essentially poached in kind of a funny way. So the university side, of course, has their own social media and their own marketing. So that department reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you interested in this role? We know you've worked with the sports teams in the past." And it was intriguing. And so I took the call and did the interview. And now what I do is help market and promote the university. Now, part of that is with social media, with Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube,
TikTok.
TikTok, so those specific channels. But then part of it is, okay, hey, the engineering department wants to promote XYZ program. So we come in from a content standpoint and say, okay, we can do this project with photography. Let's try this project with video. Maybe this project's better as a written thing. And we help hash out the ideas. And then, not that I work on every project, we have other people on staff, but okay, I'll take the lead on this project and work on a 2-minute video with some pictures and captions that we can put on the YouTube channel to help get future engineering students, right? And it's having that mindset of, okay, there's a bunch of programs. Campbell has 6,000 students. So there's a lot of different programs. How do we best promote the school? And how do we then not only keep our social media channels active and engaging and not sound like an 85-year-old's posting from them, but at the same time, promote the business school or promote the engineering or the law school. And that balance is what's fun to me. It reminds me a lot of working with these sports teams. It's just a little different, instead of a soccer team, it's how do you promote the foreign language program? So similar mindset, just a different challenge.
And as for myself, being a podcast host, I'm also the producer. I book guests. I do everything basically, and I'm a content curator as well as you are. Obviously, not for 6,000 students, but it is a full-time job because you have to continue. If you want to promote yourself, what I'm trying to do, you have to be on social media constantly and creating new material and stuff. This past year, I created over 7,400 minutes of new content. So but this is something that's not really hard work. It's something I really love. I have a passion for. But like I said, there are days where I could say to myself, I could use an assistant. But then again, I really do enjoy what I'm doing.
No, and like you said, 5 seasons showing that you can get different guests and having the balance of, okay, I can work a camera, I can work an event, I can also host an interview. Like those are the skills that are important because there's no one trick pony to making money and getting opportunities. So you don't want to box yourself in as like, I can only do this thing because otherwise it's going to be hard to find stuff.
The more you can do, I'm trying to be a jack of all trades. And in the last year since the pandemic ended here in Canada, now I'm doing live interviews on the fly where I have to talk to people live and I can't have anything scripted, just have to use my brain. So I do live interviews and I'm also doing digital writing as well. So I just want to try to make myself as valuable as try to make myself into an asset if somebody wants to look at hiring me. And I could say I do digital writing, I can do camera work, I can do host a show, I can do live interviews. So the more I can do and the more I can learn, I think that will help me. The more skills you can have.
No, that's a great point, Chris, because you're right. Like you said, whether here I am turning 30, here you are turning 50 here
50,
soon.
yeah.
Like we all have opportunities to try new things and whether it's taking a new job at a school or diving into the podcasting, like just because you're a certain number doesn't mean you stop, right? And then just because you've got a degree in something doesn't mean you have to not. Like I'm now pursuing a master's in business. I didn't take a business class in college, but I want to get more into the marketing side of it at Campbell and be more integrated in the marketing conversation. So not that it's a pivot, but it's just, I still love calling the games, but I also love doing this. So having that balance is important.
And I'm also with a local university here as well, so they're paying me for camera work, and it's good experience. And the thing is as well, I'm just trying to learn as much as I can. And you said it too. Age is just a number, and everybody from your profession that has come on here has been really great and supportive of what I'm trying to do as well.
Oh, I'm glad you brought me on because it's neat to share a little bit of what I can do. By no means have I made it, quote unquote, but making progress and enjoying it. And heck, the last 2 years I've been really fortunate to get a lot of events and a lot of neat. I covered ESPN the Ocho, which is a day of just the most random sports in the world, but it was on linear television. So I'm talking about darts and axe throwing to millions of people. It's kind of funny. It's not the way you'd envision being on ESPN, but even something like that can break in if you do it right.
One thing I've also learned about this industry too is everybody's really, for the most part, has been really supportive, but also connections and contacts. And I've even made a few friendships as well from doing the podcasting work as well.
No, I'm glad to hear it. And I know that I'll always be someone that you can reach out to and we'll touch base back and forth. Like, don't feel like this door's closed because it's not. And anyone watching too, like, whether you DM me on Twitter or, send a note on LinkedIn, I'm open to it. I've learned from a lot of different people doing the exact same thing. So I'd love to help where I can.
Do you have time for two more questions? Two more quick questions? Okay, this one I wanted to ask you, Evan. How did you end up with ESPN doing play-by-play announcing for them? And what has that experience been like?
So it's interesting. I'm a contracted employee of universities.
Okay.
In the ACC, the schools so ESPN doesn't sign my check, quote unquote, but NC State, Wake Forest, those schools will tell ESPN, hey, we've brought on this person. So that relationship, it's not necessarily, I don't have like the secret code to get on the ESPN game of the week, but with ESPN Plus and all of the digital events on ESPN, there's a lot of doors that way. And then to the second part of your question, having that ESPN logo, like I'm wearing an ACC network shirt. I've called a lot of events on that channel and on that station. That's exposure to the Southeast audience of the United States. So with schools like Georgia Tech and NC State and Florida, Miami, and up and down the coast, like that pocket of the country, there's a lot of people watching. So it's important to call the games and be balanced and be fair. And you'll see a lot of the lower levels, there's a little bit of bias when they're calling the game. And I don't want to have that. Like, even though NC State gives me a check to work the event, like I'm doing one this week, NC State, Boston College, women's basketball, we're not going to come in and say we if it's NC State. Now, deep down, do I hope NC State does well? Of course, like they're paying me to work the game and I want it to be competitive. But if Boston College goes out there and does well, we're going to talk Boston College and we're going to talk about why each team is playing at a certain level coming into the game. And that's important. So to me, that's the fun part of it is, yes, Campbell pays me to work a football game at Campbell, but I'm still talking about insert school here they're playing and the same for any sport.
The word I'm looking for, what you just said, is being a professional.
Oh, absolutely.
And one thing I've learned this too, even doing camera work for the university's varsity sports teams as well. Even if a game's a blowout, the camera guys, the broadcasters, everybody still has to work. You can't just lax off or slack off because the game's a blowout as well. You still got to fit. What's the word I'm looking for? You got to finish the broadcast strong.
No doubt. And I would say it's even more challenging to work a blowout than it is a close game. When it's a close game, the story is the game, whether that's radio, TV, hosting some interviews afterward. It's neat. I've worked a lot of blowouts this year just by happenstance. You never can predict it, but it has challenged me more and more to, okay, why would a fan turn this game off? The game's a 30-point difference in basketball. That's a lot of points. What can we do to keep them entertained and interested to maybe watch the whole game? Where in the past they would go, this team's up 30, not sure, boom, turn it off. So It's been a fun challenge.
Absolutely. And this question I have for you, Evan. Which sport is the most difficult in your opinion for doing play-by-play? And what has been your most memorable broadcast doing football, basketball, baseball? I guess some soccer you've done and field lacrosse.
Man, the most difficult sport. Ironically, I would say I don't know. I think it depends on the score, but just overall and overall, baseball to me is actually the easiest sport to call. Now that's because I played the sport. I know a lot about it. I have background. It would seem the most difficult, and I think for a lot of people it is because of the 4 hours or 3 or 4 hours. But I think there's a rhythm and a flow to baseball. To me, the hardest sport to call is soccer. And I say that more because it's a balance of storytelling, emotion, vernacular is a little different in soccer, especially depending on where you're at overseas, in the States, South America, you name it. But I don't know. I wouldn't say there's a hard sport to call. I think soccer for me personally is challenging. It's just the balance of the way I watch soccer, maybe a little different than how others watch it and how they want it described. Football is great. The challenge of football is how do I tell all of the stories that are going on? There's so much involved with 52 players on an NFL team. And then in college, you could have 105. So there's a lot of people. I'd say the prep for football is the hardest just because of the amount of players. Basketball is pretty straightforward. Yeah. So, oh man, that's a good question though.
What game has been your most memorable that you've called so far in your career?
Oh, great point. Ooh, that's a tough question. I would say, okay, maybe last year, there was a couple I'm thinking, but okay, here's one that stands out. NC State baseball was playing Notre Dame baseball. So two big names, two big programs.
Yep.
The game was on big national television. So if you had the ACC network, you could watch. So that brought some excitement and some energy to it. And then the game goes to 13 innings. So it's extra innings, back and forth. The game ends. NC State had the bases loaded, down a run, and they couldn't score with nobody out. 3 strikeouts in a row. So there was drama at the end. Notre Dame hit a home run to tie the game to force the 13th inning. So the game was so exciting, and obviously it was a lot of people watching. And, I think just the emotion of that game was memorable. I'll probably have a better answer for you in 12 months. We do more events. But to me, that stood out because of the moment, because of there was windy and wet weather, and, you're kind of battling the elements in the whole game. And here you are just trying to tell the story, and then boom, the game ends with that drama. So I think that combines for one of my favorite moments.
Last question I wanted to ask you, Evan. What advice would you give to those who are looking to pursue a career in broadcasting and media, not just myself, but into radio, TV? And I'm going to throw you on the spot with this last part of this question. Who do you have winning the national championship on Monday night between TCU, who upset my Michigan Wolverines, and Georgia, who barely escaped the Ohio State Buckeyes?
I will start up top with college football.
Okay.
I didn't think TCU would beat Michigan, so I was a little surprised there. And Ohio State played really well. I do think Georgia is still the team that had their lumps last week. I expect them to win. Now, saying that, I wouldn't be shocked if TCU wins. That will be an entertaining game, though. Maybe not as much as the Ohio State-Georgia game, but if it is, we're in for a treat. In terms of biggest advice, I would say be curious. Be curious why things are the way they are. And I think of this like with teams. When I'm prepping for a team, let's say team 1, they don't shoot the three-pointer well. Like on the season, they're 22%. Well, why is that? And get a sense whether you're interviewing a coach or you're watching the game and you're in the moment. And the fans have the same question I'm having. Like, why does this team not shoot the three? And what do they do instead? Because they don't make a lot of three-pointers. And the more curious you are of like, oh, did last year's team shoot a lot of three-pointers? Have they ever had a season this bad where they couldn't shoot a three-pointer? And all of a sudden you have some nuggets and some layers to it of, you know what? In the last 5 years, this club has never been a great three-point shooting team. You know what they've done instead? They have 2 post players that average 10 points a game, let's just say. So that curiosity, where on the stat sheet it just says, "Oh, they shoot 26% from 3." I could tell you that, but it's useful to some extent. But what's more useful is, yeah, this team has been the worst three-point shooting team in the league the last 5 years. And you go, "Oh, wow." And if they start making threes, that's a story. Or if they don't make threes, it's, yeah, they're not going to make a lot of threes because of X, Y, and Z reasons. So that curiosity is so helpful.
And also, I learned this from Chuck Swirsky from the Chicago Bulls as well. Do your homework. And he says he might not be the most talented broadcaster out there, but he said nobody will outwork me. And he goes, I pride myself on working hard and doing my homework as well.
Homework's important. Also, too, don't be a prisoner to your charts. Like, you have to watch the game too. It's such a weird dynamic, and I've learned it myself. Like, as important as the charts are, it's almost more important to pay attention and then use your charts as a reference point.
Absolutely. And Evan, I was going to say thank you so much for coming on. What's the final score of that game going to be between TCU and Georgia on Monday?
Oh man, let's be fun. Let's say 38-28 Georgia. I think it'll be pretty high scoring.
I have Georgia 35, TCU 31. 35-31. I think right now Georgia's favored at the beginning by 13 points, but to me, I think this is going to be a much closer game. I think it's going to be a 4-point game.
Yeah, as long as it's entertaining. You don't want it to be a blowout in the second quarter. Anything else is a treat for me.
Okay. Well, I was going to say again, thank you so much for coming on live with CDP Sports Talk today, my 233rd episode, and I really appreciate you coming on here, and definitely have an open invite to come back on my show again in the future if you'd like.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks so much.
And if you can give me about 15-20 minutes, I will have this downloaded to audio version, and I can send you a link to my audio version as well, and it will be on my YouTube channel as well.
Perfect. Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. Well, you have a great night, and we'll talk to you on social media again, and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay. Good night, Evan. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed my episode, season 5, episode 13 with Evan Budrovich. He's a broadcaster with, he does some work for Campbell University, and he also does some broadcasting work for ESPN as well. Just bear with me, guys, and I'm going to show you a little clip of Evan's work. This is courtesy of Evans's YouTube channel. Bear with me, and we're going to put this on just 1 second. Okay, guys, just 1 sec.
The Hall of Fame coach Wanda Watkins, Evan Budrovich with you. Both teams had over a week off with semester finals. They're back. They have 3,000 kids watching today. Who's going to shake the rust off and play well this afternoon?
The Tarboro Vikings have won 44 straight games.
Okay, guys, just bear with me. I think it just froze there for a second. Hang on 1 second. I just wanted to show you guys a clip of Evans's work from his YouTube channel. So we'll give it another 10 seconds. If it doesn't work, then we'll have to show his video clip another time as well. So again, I want to say thank you to Evan Budrovich for coming on today. So we're going to see if we can get his clip working. If not, unfortunately, it's freezing up. So I think we might have to pull the plug on that. But guys, while we're waiting for the video to come back on, if it doesn't come back on in 20 seconds, we'll just forget about it. You guys can also follow Evan Budrovich on Twitter at Evan Bud. That's at Evan Bud on Twitter. And Evan is also on LinkedIn if you wish to follow him as well. You guys can check out his website. His website is evanb5.wixsite.com/Evan Budrovich. If you want to follow him on his website, all his work is on there as well. Unfortunately, guys, the video clip is not going to work. I don't think it's freezing up. So I'm going to try it again, but I don't think it's going to work. So guys, I apologize. All right, guys. Yeah, unfortunately, I had some technical issues with my YouTube channel, so we'll show that video footage of Evan on my next podcast show as well. But you guys again can follow him on Twitter at Evan Bud, or you follow him on LinkedIn as well, and check out his website as well. Before we wrap up the podcast show, guys, I just want to let you know next Live with CDP Sports Talk, sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet, will be Thursday, January 5th, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern with Sean Bernard. He's a media relations manager and play-by-play announcer for the Ontario Hockey League's Erie Otters. Sean has been on my podcast show before about a year and a half ago. So he's going to come on and talk about the current 2022-2023 Erie Otters and also talk a little bit about the Ontario Hockey League as well. So I hope you guys can tune in tomorrow, Thursday, January 5th at 2 p.m. again with my guest, Sean Bednard, the media relations manager and play-by-play announcer for the Erie Otters. And recently he celebrated his 100th OHL broadcast with the Erie Otters as well. And he's a really good guy too. And I'm looking forward to speaking to him tomorrow. And the Otters have 2 games this week against the Guelph Storm, Friday night at the Sleeman Center, and then Saturday night in Erie as well. Live with CDP Sports Talk is live streamed on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And I want to say thank you to everybody on those 5 platforms for tuning in to season 5, episode 13 today as well. You guys can also check my website out at beacons.ai/Chris D. Palme. All my social media work there is what there as well. Live with CDP Sports Talk, again, is sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210, or tell them a CDP, aka Chris Palme, sent you there as well. And also, guys, you can now do pre-orders for the all-electric Cadillac Lyriq or the all-electric Silverado as well. So again, thanks to the folks at Barry Cullen Chevrolet for sponsoring Live with CDP podcast as well. And before we wrap this up, guys, Live with CDP podcast, the audio version is downloaded to iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Castbox, LinkedIn, Stitcher, Tuned In, and Podbean as well. And also, guys, you can email me at cpalme19@gmail.com. And you guys can follow me on all my social media platforms as well. StreamYard is the official live stream provider of Live with CDP Sports Talk podcast. If you're into webinars or doing a podcast, consider StreamYard. Excellent customer service, and it's a good product, and I highly recommend StreamYard as well. You guys can also follow me on TikTok at Live with CDP. That's at Live with CDP on TikTok. I do a lot of content there as well. Before we go, guys, please check out Hamlin's, what's his name? Sorry, Damar Hamlin's GoFundMe account for the Chasing the MS Foundation Community Toy Drive. Currently, it's at $6.5 million. So the website I just put there as well, and prayers for the Hamlin family, and hopefully he has a full recovery as well. But currently, his GoFundMe charity fundraiser is over $6.5 million. Again, prayers to Damar Hamlin and his family, and hopefully he makes a full recovery as well. And guys, again, it's called the Chasing M's Foundation Community Toy Drive, started up again by Damar Hamlin. Please consider making a donation. I made one there yesterday as well. So prayers to the Hamlin family and to the Buffalo Bills. And this just puts sports into perspective and a human element. And I agree with the teams not continuing that game Monday, and we'll see what happens with that Bills-Bengals game if it will be rescheduled in the future as well. Again, that is it, guys, for my podcast show, guys. Again, I want to say thank you to my guest, Evan Budrovich. He's a special. Sorry, guys. I want to say thank you again to my guest, Evan Budrovich, for coming on today. He's a social media content specialist with Campbell University, and he also is a play-by-play announcer, a contract worker with ESPN for their broadcast as well. So I want to say thank you so much for Evan for coming on today, and I want to say thank you to everybody for watching this live and later on my audio platforms. And I hope you guys can tune into season 5, episode 14 tomorrow with my guest Sean Bednard, the media relations manager and play-by-play announcer for the Ontario Hockey League's Erie Otters, tomorrow at 2:00 Eastern, live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn, as well as my audio platforms as well. So I hope everybody has a great night, and we'll see you guys tomorrow at 2:00 for season 5, episode 14 of Live with CDP Sports Talk, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow at 2:00 with Sean Bernard from the Erie Otters.